It's an amazing story. He was one of the first group. He arrived early, right? August 28th, there was a plane that flew over from Japan with the advanced group. Since he spoke Korean, he was among the first group of 28 Americans to arrive in Korea to arrange the surrender of Japanese troops, and subsequently served on the staff of Lieutenant General John Hodge, commander of U.S. occupation force in Korea. If you read this story here, which you'll find online, it's amazing how he ended up living in the house of the governor, the Japanese governor of the Bank of Chosen, which is now the Bank of Korea. A very fine house, still stands today, right behind the US Embassy, right, in Jongdong. Beautiful place. So he ended up a young man, I can't remember how young, but let's say around 20, rocking up and saying, okay, Mr. Governor, you're out, I'm in. And that's how it happened. So go find it online. Okay, so this is the first land edition, September 30th, 1945. It's tabloid size, it looks like this. Let's zoom in a little bit. Korea, one step closer to home. Not bad, says most of it. Beats Japan. Board strives to believe it. Miss Kung Ma sings for GIs. And then a little bit of black humor.
Oh, I've met her.
You met her?
Yes, I know her. Well, she passed on.
Wow, okay. We got a black humor, we're going to zoom in. Fails even at suicide.
Oh.
Here's a picture of Hideki Tojo after attempting suicide. On the front page, he's still alive, folks. So he lived long enough to see out his trial and was hanged. So it's like, we'll save your life, but we'll hang you later on. Anyway, that's on the front page. It's soldiers, it's black humor. Okay, so let's get into the statistical analysis. I did say that I wasn't going to do any, but actually I'm just fooling. I started this spreadsheet, I thought let's do some statistical analysis, and then I decided it's not where my interest lies, so go on to where. I'm sorry, Chris. Get on with the real stuff.
Next time.
Yeah, next time. Statistical analysis next year, we'll do it again. Okay. So I've divided up the articles in the career graphic into certain sections. We'll first do Korean culture. As I read out to you before, the career graphic was one way that soldiers found out about Korea, because unless you're a missionary kid, or you knew one, most soldiers had no idea about Korea. So, here's the career graphic issue, 14th of October, 1945, just 2 weeks after the first edition. The song of Ariran. Oh, they lost a G, but anyway, it's there, there's the song. And actually, I found this mentioned on several Korean websites as being quite significant in the history of the folk song, that this was there in this early edition, basically promoting it amongst Americans. Let's have a look at the first paragraph. Two GIs are winding their way through one of Seoul's narrow streets, and one of Seoul's countless youngsters excitedly ran toward them. The GIs were all set for the usual sounds of hello, hello! But instead, this little Korean started to sing. The words could not be understood, but the melody was a plaintive, dreamy one. I think we're all familiar with it. So within 2 weeks of their arrival, bang, of the first paper, so within a month of arrival, there's Ariran in the career graphic. Not bad. Okay, career graphic, 18th of November. Yunnori, that's just Korean craps. For those of you not familiar with the game, it's a dice game, craps. It's not an insult. It's not saying that Yunnori is crap. It's saying Yunnori is like the game of craps. So a game of chance, throwing things into the air and seeing how they fall. There are some similarities. It's interesting. Notice that this is in the street of Bunjong. It's spelled here Banchang, but it's clearly Bunjong. Bunjong is the name of a street familiar to every GI in Seoul. Leading off of Bunjong is the largest open-air market and capital. More about that later on. It's interesting. You might think he's talking about Namdumwa, but he's not. Come back to that. Okay, career graphic, 18th of November. Chinese, Japanese characters. Oh, that's nice. They're teaching how to read some Hancha. But wait a minute. Shh, below. What? Oh, they're still teaching Japanese pronunciation in November 1945. Oh well, that's what the Koreans were educated with at that point, so I guess they decided it was worth making the Japanese pronunciations, and only the Japanese pronunciations, known to the American soldiers, because you'll see there's no Korean pronunciation here at all. Go back, you'll see, so what were they teaching? The middle, down, what's that one?
School.
Kyo. Ah, yeah, Kyo, and then that one, the one with, I never learned Hancha. That's not true. I did learn it, but I forgot everything. So I always bow to people like James Pearson or somebody else to read the Hunter for me. Okay, so let's go on. Go in the wrong direction. Okay, here's the map. December 9th, 1941. So you won't get lost. All right, let's check it out. We've got number 1, Southgate. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, 24th Corps Theatre. This is very close to the British Embassy. It's now the Seoul, what's it called? Seoul City Council building? Yeah, still the same building. Although the clock that was on the tower has been removed, but the building is still the same. That was the theatre for the 24th Corps. So 3, you've got City Hall. Okay, that's still the same. Number 4, Hanto Hotel or Bando. Hanto is the Japanese pronunciation. Bando meaning Peninsula Hotel. Number 5, Chosun Hotel. Still more or less the same location, but new hotel building. Number 6, EM's Transient Hotel. Number 7, across the road, the Red Cross Bankers Club. Very fine building. Very sad that it's gone, actually, the Bankers Club. Nice. Number 8, the old post office, the central post office. And then you've got this street here, Buncheon, which is actually the street leading into Myeongdong. But it's a bit hard because the orientation is not quite accurate. It's a bit skew-if. So I'm not sure if this is the very narrow street, which is now called Myeongdong Pal Na-gil, or if it's a wider street. More about that later on. Number 10, International Dance Palace. That might be where the Uri Bank is now, or the State Tower. Not really sure. Depends on what side of the road. And number 9, the Trade Winds Bar, which looks like it was in the what is now the Shinsegae department store, and was then the Mitsukoshi department store. So this was the centre of downtown Seoul, and there were several places where the soldiers could go to amuse themselves. Okay, then, January 13, 1946, the Seoul map issued, a brand new map of Seoul. Okay, prepared by the Special Service Office, Headquarters 24th Corps, and reproduced by the 69th Engineering Topo Company, was released for distribution last week. Enough copies have been printed to furnish one to every soldier stationed in Korea. That's about $50,000 to $70,000 at that time. The map, an oblique or bird's eye view of the city, is attractively printed in 3 colours. Prominent landmarks are identified, and annoying extraneous detail, such as buildings and roads, have been eliminated. The reverse side has photographs of points of interest and a key to the map. It can easily be folded to fit into the pocket and should prove a boon to all who have had to contend with the highly accurate but confusing complex military maps of the area. Okay, so this is the back side of it. I happen to have bought one of these. Some of the photographs. This is the Gwanghwamun. This is the Shinto Shrine. Right. Now let's look at the map itself. It is indeed a nice oblique map. It shows the mountains. It's topographical. It's got. I like it. I like the way it's done. But yeah, it is kind of hard to see how the streets work sometimes. I can't tell exactly, for example, where the Bankers Club was. I think I know where it is, but I'm not really sure. You'll see here is the Shinto Shrine was still there with the steps going up from opposite Seoul Station, close to Namdaemun, the steps going up to the shrine. So that actually stood in the same place until at least the Korean War. And the steps were removed someplace afterwards. So more or less down here is where the Hilton Millennium Hotel is now. Okay, so it's a fun map. I've posted this on my Facebook to anyone who's curious. All right, now let's look more at Buncheon, 24th of February. The sightseeing GI who is seeing Seoul for the first time will find many interesting places to visit or photograph. The Buncheon, a counterpart of Delancey Street in New York, Maxwell Street in Chicago, or Mission Street in San Francisco, the prototype of the market street in hundreds of cities in the United States where they all have the same thing in common. One can purchase everything imaginable and bargain for it. This street is only 15 to 20 feet in width. Buncheon is a conglomeration of dirt and suffocating odours where each building hugs its neighbour and interposed only from time to time by Lilliputian-sized streets winding away into the wizard's maze that is Seoul's residential section. So this is part of Myeongdong. And this is the Buncheon where the largest market was. So he wasn't talking about Namdaemun at this stage, he was talking about Myeongdong was. Yeah. The Japanese gave it the name Honmachi. Korean pronunciation of those Hancha was Buncheon. But before that it had another name, I forgot it now, it's in 3 generations. Is it Jingoge? Jingoge. Okay, that was because it was a street that was a dirt street. When it rained it became very muddy, and so it got the name Jingoge. So, So now May 12th, 1946. This is the last in a series of 8 Korean legends told by Park In-dok, who studied at Columbia University after graduating from Ewha school here. She went to Columbia, and she started her own university. Still exists today in Norwon-gu. Started off as I think it was a design school or something like that, and now it's called In-dok University. So she was an important educator, but she also wrote for the Korea Graphic, telling these legends. Now, this particular legend is one about 2 lovers, one named Jinju and one named Sok, who were going to marry, but then Sok's family fell into misfortune and they lost all their money, and then Jinju was forced to go away and marry somebody else, and then later on they end up at the same Buddhist temple when they're 60, but they only meet each other once and then they die. I've never heard this story before. Is anyone familiar with the story of Jinju and Sok? Is it actually a famous Korean legend? We're not seeing too many hands going up. So it may have been one that fell into disuse after 1946, but there you go. This one is a story about, it's actually a whole page. Sometimes they had pictorial pages. This particular pictorial page is about Jeju-do. So they sent some photographers to go down there and get some stuff on Jeju-do. Now you might think, okay, Jeju-do, what are they going to, oh, Haenyeo, yeah, those divers, and the women of Jeju-do. Surprise, surprise, it's interesting. After reading countless romantic stories in sundry newspapers and periodicals describing the scenic beauties and the loudly advertised matriarchy of Jeju-do, Isle of the Amazons, Korean graphic writers journeyed to that much-touted island and found that the matriarchy is non-existent and that Amazon has not publicly asserted her authority for over 500 years. In vain, they combed over the island's grassy slopes and rocky beaches to find just one hardy Amazon, and thereby preserve their tottering faith in the fidelity of American journalists. But they were disappointed and returned, disheartened to soul, to chronicle their experience and to repeat the oft-told legends of Jeju-do. Wow. Even then, it was already a story that was well known. Alright, next section we'll look at some cartoons, because every good newspaper has some humor, some cartoons. Let's start off with here's a story about Kim Yong-hwan, who was the father of Korean animation. Studied in Japan, came back to Korea in 1944, and started a very popular cartoon series called Kojubu. Now Kim Yong-hwan, this is his own self-portrait. He drew, even in his spare time, he drew, not always cartoons, sometimes he did portraiture. He romanized his name Kim Yong-han, H-A-N, but it's definitely Kim Yong-hwan when you see it written down in the Hangul. Now this is an interview with him. Kojubu brings back laughter to Korean lips. It's interesting, Kojubu was not a cartoon published in the Korea Graphic. It was actually published in an English newspaper called Seoul Times, which was one of only 2 privately published English language newspapers put together by Koreans who had been educated overseas. The office of Seoul Times was behind the Bandor Hotel, more or less at the intersection of Cheonggyecheon and Ulchiro. So very close by. They obviously knew each other because sometimes they quote each other. Right? And so they had an interview with Kim Yong-hwan. And so to commemorate the interview, they did publish one of his cartoons, which is a Humbunobu story. Right? Brother, you are cruel and foolish. This house belongs to me. Go away quickly. Go away. Oh, my darling, we've been driven away. Papa, let us go back to our house. And then they go and live in this tumble-down thatch shack. Here we are. This is the house in which we must live. Come, let us work very hard. And then here they are kneeling in front of a shrine, doing a bit of jesa, gratitude to the ancestors. Right? To be continued. I'm not sure if it actually was continued. I should point out, the problem with the Korea Graphic is that nowhere in the world, as far as I know, does there exist a complete archive of every issue of the Korea Graphic. I have some. There are some online, digitally, at the National Library of Korea. And Stanford University has some in their library, but nowhere has a complete collection. So I've got some, but not all. So I can't tell if this actually was continued, but it's nice that they did go to the trouble of translating it and publishing it. So Kim Yong-hwan got a bit of a fillip there. Here is an actual Kojubu cartoon. from Seoul Times, 21st of September 1945. This is Kojibu. Seoul Times was a single sheet of paper about A3 in size, very, very fine, delicate tissue paper. That's why it looks quite hard to see, but it's very gentle humour. Man loses his hat, he spies it through the fence, gets a stick, picks it up. Now, what next? It's misspelt. It does say war next, but clearly it's supposed to say now what next. But yeah, so it's a gentle humour. Maybe it hasn't really translated through the ages, a bit like Charlie Chaplin, but still. There he was every day, and he became more and more famous in the end, producing a series of books in which Kojibu tells the stories of the Samguk-sai. You can still buy that today. And Kim Il-sung also later designed propaganda leaflets during the Korean War, targeting the North Koreans and the Chinese. So it's, when you can draw, you can use it for many different purposes, I suppose. Paul Norris, he was a cartoonist. He was published in the Korea Graphic 28th of October. And look at this. He's telling the story of Dongmyo. This is to link today's presentation with my previous presentation in November of 2014, which is all about Dongmyo and Kwanu. The first cartoon that I found by Paul Norris is telling the story of Dongmyo. It just used the name Norris, but I did a bit of Googling and found out that actually after leaving the army, moving back to the States, Paul Norris became quite famous. Is anyone familiar with Paul Norris as a cartoonist? No? Well, he did Brick Bradford for over 30 years, which is a science fiction serialized cartoon. But he also invented Aquaman. Paul Norris, the inventor of Aquaman. So he was here in Korea. Before that, he was in Japan with the occupation there. Mr. Norris also produced work to encourage soldiers on the Japanese mainland to surrender, but they were not needed since Japan surrendered before an invasion became necessary. He also designed surrender leaflets for Japanese soldiers occupying Korea. This is from his obituary in the San Diego Union Tribune. Sadly, he did not mention his fine work in Korea Graphic. That's the other interesting thing, is not only is there not a full archive of the Korea Graphic anywhere, but Korea Graphic doesn't rate a mention in any history books. It's not mentioned, it's mentioned precisely once in Husafik, the history of the United States Armed Forces in Korea, and it's not mentioned in any other books that I found, except for a Korean article, and that'll come up later on. Here's another cartoon by him. This is Paul Norris telling the story of Yi Sun-shin and the turtle ships. Great, great artist. Alright, and here's another cartoon, Korea Graphic, 18th of Nov, 1945. Something in Korean. Can anyone tell me what this says? I can see Sanapda at the bottom, Sanapda, but the top part there, Nejan Dong Palje, does that mean something? Ah, Je Pal Dong Jan Ne? No? Does that mean anything?
Nothing.
Okay, so it's nonsense then, perhaps. But the Intel guy, Intel, says he's okay. Oh, sorry, he's saying, "Oh, my aching back," because it's the man with the heavy jjigae. Perhaps a soldier who learned some Hangul just wrote a nonsense phrase and then wrote a translation for it. Perhaps, not sure. Guesswork. All right, here's another cartoon from the 18th of November. That was actually a big issue for cartoons, as you can see. We had Norris, we had Mac, bottom there, and we had this one, Buttercup. Ah, she has an idea. Soldier coming around the corner. Oop, she's putting on the waterworks. Soldier says, "Hey, I'll give you a chocolate." All right, scored. That's a familiar trope though, isn't it, right? US soldiers, chocolate and gum, it's a familiar trope. It's funny to see it being played upon in this way. And then there's this one, this isn't even a cartoon, it's just a wonderful illustration by Emil Hess in the very same issue, 18th of November. The back page, the very bottom, is like a long panorama view of the Seoul street scene, some oxen pulling carts. It's almost photographic, but it's a pen drawing, it's wonderful. So I looked him up, Emil Hess. He must be somebody. Yeah, he was an artist in the New York area, died in the early 2000s. Here's another drawing by him. This is 24th Corps in Seoul extends its heartiest greetings. It's a Christmas card drawn from, it looks like it's from Myeongdong, sort of up the slope of Namsan, looking down over the city. Right, you've got the Capitol building here. You've got the Gooks. Here's another racial epithet. We've had Japs, we come to Gooks now. Now, why would I say that? Okay, well, this is from Husavik. This is the only mention in Husavik of choreographic. The only mention in 5 volumes. There was, furthermore, a tendency to take a scornful attitude toward the Gook, quote-unquote. The term which applied to all Polynesian or Oriental natives. The term became particularly current in Korea because of the inability of the soldier to distinguish readily between the Korean, Japanese and Chinese, and the frequent need of a ready designation for any person who was not Caucasian. Its exaggerated use led the 24th Corps newspaper to make a plea that the more specific and accurate term Korean be used. Why not? The choreographic called attention to the implication of inferiority unquestionably present, an implication undoubtedly not lost upon the Koreans. That's from Husavik, Volume 2, Part 2. So I thought, I've got to find this article. So I dug it up. As early as 9th of December 1945, we're talking 3 months after the arrival of the US troops on the ships from Okinawa. Within 3 months, there was already an article answering the question, what is a Gook? And then finishing up, it is as easy to say Korean as it is to say Gook. It is more polite. It is more scientific. Why not call a spade and a Korean a Korean? This was fascinating to me because I'd always heard this story, maybe we've all heard this story over the years, that Gook was something that was like a bastardization of Miguk, but actually we find that this word predates that by a long time. In fact, it goes back as far as the US occupation of the Philippines. So it was a word used almost universally for every non-white, every Caucasian. And it just so happened that it fell together with Miguk and Hanguk. So that's a folks etymology, what we call that in linguistics. It sounds appealing, it sounds plausible. It's not true. Right? But anyway, so it's interesting that they were talking about it as early as then, even way before the Korean War. Okay, now we get into cuties, the next segment. Cuties with a K. Why do I misspell it? You'll see. Okay, first story, September 30th, 1945. GIs teaching Korean girls to jitterbug. Where was this? GIs strolling through Post Office Square in the centre of the city have stopped and listened. Music, solid American stuff, has been coming from the 4th floor of the Mitsukoshi building. So there it was, the Mitsukoshi building, now the Shinsegae department store headquarters, was a dance hall, an American-style ticket dance hall, where you'd buy a ticket and you would dance, and this is where Americans taught Korean girls to jitterbug. Never heard of Sinatra. They even had a live band who'd never heard of Sinatra, but they were a live band playing American stuff. They're getting groovy. Great old that old language. All right, now, 14th of October. Geisha, no, in Korean it's gisan. Again, they've lost the G, gisan, but yeah, misspelling. Good food, entertainment, girls. Geisha houses. To most GIs arriving here, this term meant only one thing. They had their own ideas on the subject. Their minds made up before they ever heard of Korea. To put it mildly, the better class Oriental geisha houses, at least in Korea, do not exactly conform to the mental picture most Americans have of them. What picture would that be? That's all, brother. The geisha house here, it was learned, is not the geisha house of the Occidental fellow with uplifted eyebrow, associates with the Far East. Koreans call them gisan houses, gisan. Places of good food, music, entertainment, and excellent service, and that's all. The girls who provide said excellent service and entertainment are quite well educated and possess poise and dignity. As is the custom, men meet at the Gisan house for entertainment, often to discuss business in a friendly, joyful atmosphere, and so on and so on. A high-class evening house. All right. Now, Korea graphic, 28th of October. On the left, Korea with clothes and K, the Korean cutie, and on the right, US with less. This is a newspaper for soldiers. Remember, men who are away from their wives and girlfriends, they like to look at pretty women from time to time. So we have on the left the Korean cutie, whose name is Kim Dong-sun, apparently, or Dong-sun maybe, and on the right, Ava Gardner. who, according to the caption here, was already divorced from Mickey Rooney by the time this photograph was taken. Mickey Rooney, of course, as I love to say, was a man who was so dedicated to the idea of marriage that he did it 8 times. Anyway, so this was the very first Korean cutie that I was able to find. There are more. Okay, 4th of November, Korea graphic. Boy meets girl. Okay, in the US, but not here. For American soldiers and Korean girls to walk arm in arm through the streets, quote, is not ethical, and other people will look down upon the character of that girl, said a recent Korean newspaper editorial. The editorial prompted Lieutenant General John R. Hodge, commander of the US Army forces in Korea, to ask a Korean authority this question: what about the American soldiers' attitude toward Korean young girls? In his reply, he wrote as follows: the Oriental, generally speaking, have preserved a deep-rooted distinction between the male sex and female sex. Especially in Korea, this has been strictly preserved since ancient times, though there has been a slight relaxation since Japanese residents began to move into this country, and the Japanese cultural influence made its influence on the Korean culture. Even under the tyranny of the Japanese government, the Koreans were able to preserve the distinction between both sexes, etc., etc. Korean women secluded. Okay, so that's 4th of November. Same issue. E is on another Korean cutie. So a little bit of pushback, perhaps. Then the 2nd of December 1945, Korean cutie doing the dance of the 7 veils. But I'm not sure who this is. There is no caption. It may have been the daughter of Chae Seung-hee, Korea's most famous Western-style dancer at that stage. No idea. And then Korea graphic that was a special issue for New Year's Day 1946 brought out a calendar of drawings by Paul Norris, creator of Aquaman. He did cartoon characters for every month of the year. My favourite is August. It's the month that I'm born, but also because look, it's got the cut, short skirt, and a Korean tobacco pipe. All right, that same issue, January 1st, 1946. It's not always about just Korean cuties. There are also focus on Caucasian American cuties. Here's an article about Jane Russell in her film The Outlaw. It was the movie that Howard Hughes made 4 years ago, starring Jane Russell and never exhibited. It also made Jane, who busted out all over in pin-ups. Some great punty here. It seems that Jane's peekaboo shirtwaist had too much peak, so the censors said boo. In the intervening years, Hughes has been fighting the censors, ruling that too much of Jane's best points were visible on the screen. And finally, he has won. The Outlaw will open nationally on 8th of December, uncut and unchanged, with the original luster of the Russell charms undimmed. All right, then you've got 6th of January, the very next issue, Pin 'em Up. All white American women. Right, and then 3rd of March 1946, Korean dancer would perform for GIs. This was a famous Korean dancer named Cho Young-ja, 23-year-old rising star of Korean balletdom. And the interesting thing is in the last paragraph, she says, following her international theatre appearance with a tour of the provinces, Miss George doesn't plan to perform again until late this year, unless, she repeated, she gets that chance to dance for American soldiers. Well, fellows, looks like it's your move. Then we've also got, this is actually quite common, in many issues of the Korea graphic, there was a photograph of somebody's girlfriend or sister or cousin back home under the title Sweetheart. And so it would have a little description, blue-eyed brunette. I don't know why they're using the word brunette, but there you go. And then an invitation at the bottom. If you have a sweetheart, send in her photograph so we can all gawk at her. And then we've got 14th of October 1946, Korean cutie number 1. And the caption, I love this, good for the soul. Oh, the puns. The soul-based puns were already coming out then. Good for the soul. Sitting above, placidly looking at you, is one of Korea's outstanding beauties, Miss Yong-ha Chun. She's 19, 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighs 115 pounds. GI's gentleman, she says. The young educated women who worked in Yusamjik offices were often approached for dates. The women, their families and Korean society in general misunderstood these overtures, and they put the women in a difficult position. For example, one morning an American officer found that his Korean receptionist was very upset by a leaflet that a man had handed her on the way to work. He ordered up a rough translation and found that it said, We could not overlook you, womanhood, when you fool around with Westerners and just showing your vanity and worldly devices, which is nothing but scandalous, while you should put all your strength in establishing the state of New Korea. From now on, any one of you who shows the following scandalous actions, beware that you will be insulted right in front of public. Well, what could these points be? Well, let's go. Number one, those women who are quite animated in riding automobile with Westerners. Number two, those women who wink at Westerners in saying hello gum and my home in such short words. Number three, those women who chew gum and stroll all over town. Number four, those women who are whispering to the Westerners in the night. Number five, those women who go into the dance hall just because they're crazy about coffee and chocolate. Actually, surely you would think that number five was the least harmful of all of them. If they're only going to the dance hall because they're crazy about coffee and chocolate. Yeah, that's from Donald Clark, but I actually think that this original, he doesn't have a footnote there to say where this comes from, but I believe this comes from an issue of the Corps Courier, which I had at home but have unfortunately lost, so I can't tell you which issue of the Corps Courier it came from, but anyway, there's the quote. So, and then lastly, spooks. Okay, spooks mean spies. What's going on there at the Korea graphic? This is a quote I showed you before at the start, explaining what the Korea graphic is. The staff of the Korea graphic takes this opportunity of extending its congratulations to ex-editor Private First Class Bob Klonsky for a job well done. January 13, 1946. Bob Klonsky. Does that name ring a bell to anyone? No? Alright. The communist group in the United States Armed Forces in Korea and their relation with Alice Hyun after the liberation of Korea. 9 soldiers and civilian employees of Asiatic were expelled from South Korea in early 1946 because of their involvement with communist activities. The G2 Intelligence and Counterintelligence Corps were afraid that the Information and Education section, that's IE&G, the people who put together Corps Korea, Korea Graphic and TIP, became the secret base of communist operation. The core figure was, and this is a mistype, James Klonsky, but throughout the story it is actually Robert Klonsky. He had a number of aliases, including Kirby, but his real name was Robert Klonsky, who was famous for his communist activities before army conscription and worked as editor of the Korean Graphic magazine published by I&E section. He contacted Alice Hyun, who worked for the Civil Communication Intelligence Group Korea, and she was Assistant Chief of District Station 1 of CCIG Korea. She hired many North Koreans and communists as interpreters to interfere with the function of CCIGK. Wow, okay, so a lot of information from this article by Professor John of Ewha University. It's a great article. This is just the, the English abstract at the end, because it was, I discovered this quite late in my preparation, so I didn't have time to read the entire article, so I just copied from the abstract. Now, Alice Hyun was the sister of Peter Hyun. We sell his book at the RAS. They're at the back. Manse and In the New World, The Making of a Korean American. One of the very, very first Korean families to move to the United States, and Alice was actually born, I believe, in the United States. The father, Hyun Sun, was a pastor and was involved with the provisional government in Shanghai. Peter Hyun later on became he worked in the performing arts in New York as a theatre director. But before he died, he published these 2 memoirs. And his sister Alice, yeah, she was a communist. In fact, when they lived in Shanghai, a regular visitor to their house was Pak Hon-yong. Pak Hon-yong, leader of the South Korean communists, who was later on arrested and killed in North Korea by Kim Il-sung. Why? Perhaps because of his association with these Americans. Because he actually did meet. Yeah, Peter Hyun, brother of Alice Hyun, and he was the official interpreter of Asiatic. Harold Zeppelin, I like the name, Oh the Humanity, Robert Calder, Oh the Humanity. Clerk of the Banda Hotel, Edwin B. Brown, field lieutenant, and Carl C. Sonu, Chief of Secretary of the Military Government of North Gyeongsang Province, were also under suspicion. Peter Hyun openly met with Pak Hon-yong, the leader of the South Korean Communist Party, and Yo Eun-kyung, who was a famous left-of-centre but moderate political leader in South Korea, who was the one who Governor General Abe actually handed over the reins of control of the Government General to before the Americans arrived in September 1945. Park Kon-young met with Klonsky, Zeppelin, Frisch, and Alice and wrote recommendation letters to US Communist Party for them. Klonsky and Frisch both worked for Korea Graphic. Klonsky was the senior editor at one point. Frisch was one of the junior editors and writers. So it's interesting that how did they get caught? Well, the article that I'm quoting here starts with the March 1st demonstration, 1946, the very first Samiljeol after liberation. Very first March 1st movement. There was a big street parade from, well, it went to Namsan. I can't remember where it began. It might have begun at Namdaemun, went to Namsan, and Klonsky and Alice Hyun joined up with this parade. But the parade was banned. It was actually forbidden by the US military government. And so MPs found Klonsky, arrested him, pulled him out of line, and found Alice Hyun, arrested her, and that was the beginning of the end for him. So he was questioned, and eventually he was stuck on a boat and sent back to America to avoid a court-martial. So he didn't actually serve any jail time for that, but he did get thrown out of Korea 2 months before his tour came up, before his tour expired. What's really interesting is, actually, if you look at his history, before World War II, he fought in the Spanish Civil War on the Republican side in the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. Right, so American volunteers who went to help the anti-fascists in Spain, but he was one of them, and then later on he came back to America and enlisted in World War II. So they should have had a pretty good idea that he might have been a communist before he ended up in Korea editing a newspaper pitched at American soldiers. They should have had an idea, but maybe they didn't. Now, this is a recent one. Mike Klonsky, another communist in Obama's fringe promoting progressivism and his small schools. Mike Klonsky was born in 1943. His father, Robert Klonsky, was an American communist who was convicted in the mid-1950s for advocating the forcible overthrow of the US government, a violation of anti-communist legislation known as the Smith Act. So it's good to see that it's living on in the family. There is actually a small Wikipedia article about Klonsky, and it's got some information there from the New York Times, quoted in the Wikipedia article. Klonsky and Walter Lowenfels were defendants in a trial in the mid-1950s of 9 Philadelphia members of the Communist Party. They were convicted in 1954 of violating the Smith Act, which outlawed teaching or advocating the overthrow of the American government by force. He served over a year at the federal penitentiary at Allenwood, Pennsylvania, before the Justice Department withdrew charges in 1958. Not sure why they would do that, but that's interesting. After that, he moved to California, had a bookshop near UCLA for many years, and died in the early 2000s. So interesting character, Klonsky. He also wrote about Korea afterwards. Here's a magazine called Korea Focus. This is not the Korea Focus you might have seen in South Korea. As you can tell by South Korea, US Japanese colony. This one was produced by ACFIC, the America Korea Friendship and Information Center, which existed for 5 years in an expensive office in Manhattan, New York City, and now are putting out pro-North Korea information and propaganda. So their journal, magazine, was called Korea Focus, and he wrote this article 27 years ago, the United States soldier in South Korea. He was with the tank battalion in Okinawa, and there he served as editor of the Korea Graphic, Army newspaper for the occupation forces. Earlier, he fought in the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, as I mentioned, during the war against fascism in Spain. So he writes this article about his experience, and he mentions this incident. A dramatic example of our efforts to get the information out of the country at that time concerned the late and respected writer Edgar Snow. Quite famous. In early '46, Snow arrived in Seoul. He was then working as associate editor of the Saturday Evening Post. He came to see me one day, indicating that he had learned of my contact with certain individuals, he was anxious to speak with. Would I help arrange a get-together? My fear and nervousness over the possibility that my relationships were becoming too widely known and represented a threat to the safety of my Korean friends was momentarily overcome by my enthusiasm for the idea of a man of Snow's stature getting some of the truth published back home regarding the terrible role being played by our government and army. So it's interesting, he's putting out a newspaper for the army, while at the same time very much convinced that the army is doing bad things in Korea. So he must be suffering some mental anguish, I can imagine. He was shocked and indignant. This is talking Edward Snow. He was shocked and indignant at the stories and reports presented to him that night. He promised to present the facts in the Saturday Evening Post. Months later, after my discharge from the army and my return home, I secured the magazine's issue containing Snow's article. Alas! It would let him go to North Korea, or the Czechs wouldn't let him leave. One of the two. Anyway, he committed suicide when he was about 44, quite a young man. So it didn't end well for the young family. Very sad. After the father, Pastor Hyun-sun, being such a big independence activist, to amount to this, it's certainly a tragic fact. And what about Zeppelin? Zeppelin, the humanity, the desk clerk at the Bando Hotel. Well, 1954, Washington, the Justice Department Monday announced the arrest of 2 additional alleged Communist Party leaders in Colorado. One of them, Harold Zeppelin, 28, Communist Party organizer for Colorado. So there certainly were a few communists, but I think perhaps because it was such an embarrassment to make a big issue out of it, they weren't put on trial by the US Army. They were just sent back home quietly to make trouble there, rather than in Korea. And then some miscellaneous articles. How are we doing with time? Okay. Oh, all right, but a few miscellaneous articles, just fun things that I found that didn't fit into any of the categories that we did before. So, September 30, 1945, Koreans published English paper before Yanks came. And this is a story all about that newspaper I mentioned, the Seoul Times, which existed almost until the beginning of the Korean War. So about 5 years from the very end of the Japanese period until just before the Korean War. Though what happened to the publisher? Oh, one of the 2 publishers was kidnapped by the North Koreans and taken north during the war, never heard from again. The other one, I'm not sure. But they also published some cartoons, 3 cheers for free and independent Korea. This is from the very first issue of the Seoul Times, which came out on, I think it was the 7th of September. So before the Americans even arrived, they already had the first issue out, Seoul Times. Choreographic 2nd of December. This is also going to link to a previous presentation I've given here at the RAS about the prisoner of war camps that held Allied soldiers during the Second World War, run by the Japanese. The Keijo, that's the Japanese name for Seoul, Keijo main camp had rigid rules for Allied POWs. So that one of the first tasks, of course, of the US occupation forces was free any Allied POWs, that's number 1. And number 2 is disarm the Japanese and send them home. So they went to that camp, which was located very close to Sungyeong Women's University, Sukdae. And afterwards, in the month of December, the whole property was given to a foundation to start a girls' school. And it's still a school today, Shingwan Yoja Junghakyo, Shingwan Yojun, still a school. And in fact, the building, you can see here, where the prisoners were housed, the 4-story building, that stood until 4 or 5 years ago. It was only demolished 4 or 5 years ago because it was deemed unsafe, the structure, structurally unsound. So they tore it down and built a new building there. But this is still school property. It was wonderful for me to find these photographs, because they're so rare, photographs of the POW camp in Korea. Totally forgotten. There's no plaque, there's no memorial, there's nothing anywhere at any of the camps. So if you work at an embassy from Australia, Britain or the United Kingdom, and you'd like to see about getting a plaque there to commemorate these soldiers who were held there, talk to me later on. Same issue, classes begin at 24th Corps University. Wow! They had a university here for the soldiers. In the first 3 months, bang, they had a university open. Where was it? Across the road. No, really, across the road. If you look at the map that I've got, it shows that the property that we used to call US Embassy Residential Compound Number 2, across the road with the high stone wall that you can't see, that was the 24th Corps University for a few years, where they taught a number of courses on things. Yeah, the university, which is located about 2 blocks east of the Governor General's building in Seoul, is offering 42 courses, of which 9 have registrations of more than 150 each. The most popular are photography, advertising, business law, small business, and elementary bookkeeping. In a later edition of the Choreographic, it mentions that they were going to start an article on, start a course on dairy farming. at the 24th Corps. So imagine cows walking around across the road here in compound number 2, and soldiers learning how to milk them so they could go back and run dairy farms. Lots of fun. 6th of January 1946, the Bankers Club, I mentioned that, opens for GIs. The Red Cross, they opened it up as a place for GIs to go and listen to music, have a drink, have a relax, and play some ping pong. And then 31st of March, US-Soviet Commission convenes in Seoul on the steps of the Sokjojon building inside Doksugun Palace. That's where the Americans and the Soviets met for 2 rounds of talks, completely unsuccessful, as we know, because Korea is still divided. But anyway, that's when they were meeting, and there was still hope. There was still hope in March of 1946 that the 2 superpowers could somehow get together and create a stable, democratic, independent Korea. Didn't happen. Look, you probably won't see this again. Seoul educators honour General MacArthur. The same General MacArthur whose statue they were tearing down in Incheon Park 10 years ago. Yes, that's the one. General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander of Allied Forces Pacific, was awarded an honorary Doctor of Law degree, in absentia, he wasn't in, by Seoul University on July 4th. Lieutenant General John R. Hodge, Commanding General of the United States Army Forces in Korea, accepted the award for General MacArthur. Although he had been invited to attend the commencement ceremonies, General MacArthur was unable to do so because of the great pressure of occupation duties as Supreme Commander of the Pacific. Wow. So somewhere in his papers, there's this honorary law degree from Seoul National University. From 4th of July, Independence Day. Silver Dollar Bar opens at Seoul Club. Now Seoul Club, if I'm not mistaken, Robert Neff would correct me, but he's not here, he's sadly in Taiwan. The Seoul Club was at that time located in Junmyeongjeon, the former Imperial Library next to the American Embassy residence. Am I correct?
Yes.
Then I have a problem with this. First sentence. The sawdust and gaslight traditions of the Old West will be revived and given a new luster in the Seoul Club's 3rd floor game room. 3rd floor? They only ever had 2.
On the roof?
So maybe, yeah, maybe on the roof. So anyway, wow, so they had this, they threw down sawdust there and played Sweet Adeline, had mustachio bartenders and had a good old gaming room. Wow, what a great... I wonder if they put the saloon, the swing doors in there and someone walked in with spurs and a hush fell over. Anyway, terror in Europe. Remember when there was ISIS back in 1946? No? But it was a quiet weekend in Tel Aviv. British troops on pass for the first time in a month were once more patronising Jewish cafes, spending off-duty hours in Jewish movie houses. The mutterings of Jew and Arab alike were almost negligible. But if Palestine was subdued last week, the Jewish question gained momentum throughout Europe. Jews in Poland planned a one-day strike protesting the British policy in the Holy Land at a time when the world's worst post-war anti-Semitic riot was sweeping Poland. Reported responsible for the terror was the story of a frightened 8-year-old Polish boy who claimed he was held in the basement of a Jewish apartment house and threatened with his life. Not until 40 persons had been killed and 60 injured was it learned that the child had been forced to lie by a Pole who had instructed him to spread the tale. Wow, well, it's not much to say about that, except that it's sad that we haven't moved on very far from that. And then July 4th, Independence Day. This is one of those full-page pictorial features. I want to zoom in on one of those photographs. One of those photographs that made me scratch my head and say, what?
3 minutes.
Show card colours proclaim in 2 languages the joint independence of the United States and the Philippines, as the 282nd AGF band parades through Memorial Archway. And indeed, here in English and in Hanja and Chinese characters, it is proclaiming the joint independence of the United States and the Philippines. Why? Because on the 4th of July 1946, the United States granted independence to the Philippines. And so, 4th of July, we celebrate that. So here's your Filipino flag, US flag. So it's somewhat ironic, if you believe in irony, some don't, that the independence of the Philippines was celebrated in Korea before the independence of Korea was celebrated in Korea. One of those ironies of history. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your indulgence, and I come over. Thank you.
Jaco can entertain a few questions from the floor.
I will make it.
So anybody?
Thank you
has
for your
questions?
presentation. You talk about the societal relationship of South Korean government and society in general with U.S. Army. That is during 1950. 1950, is it?
No, 45 to 49.
49, yeah, that's
Before
about 7 or 8 years ago.
Correct.
But the society relationship with South Korean government society in general, it's not with U.S. armed force. It's not like that. This is 70 years ago. It's gone. That all has happened. What it said is happened bygone era. So now it's a new Korea government society in general. It's existed. It's completely different. The power capacity is different.
That is true. I should specify, I didn't say that before. Ladies and gentlemen, this was in fact a lecture about history. So I'm only focusing on that period, 45 to 49. It is true that relations between the Korean public and American forces are a bit different now. We're 7 decades later, yes. So I don't want to say that, I don't want to draw any similarities, lessons, conclusions between what happened in 45 to 49 and the way that things are today. It certainly is a very different era. And one of the reasons perhaps why this period of history is so interesting to me is because it's so easily overlooked. We have, before 1945, we have the Japanese colonization from 1910 or 1905, depending on where you start counting, to 1945. And then after 1950 you had the war, and then you had Reconstruction. So it's very easy to overlook this period of 45 to 49 when the US forces were here. In fact, that's why I find it so interesting, because there's so little written about it. So thanks for that.
Can be misunderstood. Anybody else?
Thank you for your very enlightening presentation. How long did it take to actually disarm the Japanese soldiers? Because my understanding is they were actually used in the beginning of the occupation as police for quite a long period of time. And I just didn't know if your research, if you had uncovered about that.
There is an interesting article I read not long ago about, I've forgotten the title, but I can email it to you, an article about the process of not just disarming, but repatriating. So repatriating soldiers, repatriating civilians. Now there were, if you include Korea, so the whole Korean peninsula and Manchuria, there were well over 1 million Japanese, mostly civilians, but well over 1 million Japanese in Korea and Manchuria, who all were forcibly repatriated to Japan, except for those whom the Soviets kept for labor. It was a process of some months, because the first repatriations happened voluntarily. Before the Americans even arrived on the 9th of September, some Japanese were already saying, okay, it's time to get out, not working well for us here. So they were getting all the possessions they could and taking private ships over. Then the Americans came and said that they weren't sure what to do at first with the civilians, and then eventually, like maybe a couple of weeks or a month later, they said, now we have a policy, all civilians must go, everybody out, and you can only take this much money with you, you can't take any valuables with you. And that created actually a healthy and thriving black market in currency exchange, sale of goods, and smuggling ships to smuggle as many goods to Japan as possible. But at the same time, Koreans were coming back from Japan to Korea, so they were looking to trade in their Japanese yen for Korean yen. So there was a really interesting two-way trade, but it took at least 6 months to get the bulk of them out. Yeah. Thanks for the question. There's a mic coming to you.
Thank you for your very interesting lecture. I was just wondering, I was reading a book called Brothers at War, which covers a bit about the American period of occupation, and it describes increasing chaos in like the the southern part of the peninsula prior to the outbreak of the war, essentially. And I was wondering what you found in your media sources, that if there were any indications of that in the American trade press.
Yeah, that's a good question. Certainly there was the Daegu riots, and there were strikes. There was the Yosu Suncheon uprising. There was what happened on Jeju. There were several, many different things that went on in that occupation period, which were contrary to U.S. policy and contrary to the order that the U.S. were trying to impose on Korea at the time. You won't find any of that in the Korea Graphic, because it is, after all, published by the Troop Information and Education section of the 24th Corps, so their purpose is to push a good line. It's a bit like looking on Korea.net and expecting to see bad news about what happens in Korea. The Korean government's not going to put that up there. Right? The best source for that, well, for one period anyway, there's a book called Japan Diary by Mark Gain, or Gain, G-A-Y-N. You can find it online. There's a digitized copy on Brother Anthony's website, I think, or on the RA's website. He spent most of a year living in Japan writing about the Japanese occupation, but he did spend a month in Korea, I think it was early, let's say February, March 1947, just after or just before one of the riots or disturbances, and he writes a lot about that, and he had incredible access and met a lot of interesting people whom the Americans didn't want him to meet. So Japan Diary by Mark Gain is a good resource for that, but no, none of it in the Korea Graphic. Thank you for the question. Anyone else?
No more? Okay.
We're late.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Wonderful crowd. Thank you, Kathryn. Yes. Folks. Yes, welcome to the RAS. As you might have read in our newsletter, we're having a membership drive. We need many, many new members. People keep going away from Korea, and you want new members. No, we want the membership fees. We want the money. We want the members. No, we want members. And we are very happy to have new members. We also have student membership for people who are students. It's cheaper, and we would like to have more students. So, upcoming lectures.